Hi everyone. Thanks to Raghu for inviting me here, and thanks to Benedict for having me. Um, Raghu asked me to talk about a topic I'm not an expert on at all, so I'll do what I normally do when I'm asked to talk about anything. I build systems for a living. I'm an engineer, and I perceive the world through what my users do with the systems and what they do not do with the systems and interpret that. So I'm going to give it a try. My understanding of the future of the work is that there will be no work. Work as we know within the next 20 years will disappear. And what you normally perceive as work, which is finding a job or keeping the industrial society we have running, or making sure the machine of farm or goods and services, making sure that works, will no longer need people. Doesn't mean we won't do things, but it won't be work. Now we have this image of India, which kind of wakes up a lot of students and business leaders and professionals of this rising India. We just hit 8.3% and $2.8 trillion. We just overtook Great Britain and on our way to overtaking a couple of other countries, and we'll be right behind Japan and China and the US shortly. And you're building fancy cities like Amravati and so on, and we're building rockets and we're building amazing things. The future is bright. And but there is the tsunami coming, and the tsunami is that we will see growth. Our economy will increase. Our economy will grow at the rates that have been projected. And if we do a few things right in the sphere of public policy, it'll even grow faster. I think 8.3 to me is the lower bar. We can easily grow at 11% given the potential India has. And if I don't get to that in this talk, ask me how later. Probably even 12% if we choose to. And it's just national will that is missing. But you won't have jobs. And I will try to prove this mathematically with this one-line proof. And you can question me about that proof or think about it yourself. The way I know that we won't have jobs or jobs will decline is that the growth of productivity of all the systems, the collective systems that humanity is building, the growth of productivity will far outstrip, not a little bit, it will far outstrip the growth of the economy itself. So if you know how jobs happen because you need to be productive and the growth requires more people to be doing work and so on. And if growth of productivity is far higher than the growth of the economy, then the number of jobs will decline and they will not grow. So we are in this inflection point in India in the last 5 years, and public policy makers and politicians have been struggling. They don't know what to do about it, right? And the inflection point is that we have this growth, but jobs are not growing. So people don't understand what it is. People give it labels. They call it Soot Boot Ki Sarkar. They give it all kinds of names, right? But the reality is no politician can do anything about this. There's nothing any party can do about an economy. The only choice is we become protectionist, we prevent automation, and then we'll become so unproductive that we will decline as an economy. That's not a choice. Next. So before I move off this slide, so there is one of my juniors from one of my alma maters, Carnegie Mellon. He built this factory recently. His family runs yarn mills in Delhi. And 2004, when he came back from Carnegie Mellon, he built a factory, a very modern, advanced factory, right? And he measures his productivity at a number of workers per 100,000 spindles that spin yarn, right? And I won't give away his trade secrets, but what he did is in 2014, he built another factory, the one you see behind me. And the quality was 50% higher, the productivity was 50% higher, and in rupee terms, he spent the same amount of money building this factory as he spent in 2004, even ignoring inflation. So actually, he spent less, built a more productive factory, and it was employing half the number of people per 100,000 spindles, right? And this is the story of India. I'm not talking about, so the reason I'm giving an Indian example is people often talk about automation and show you Tesla. or Google, cars and so on. The future is here, it's not there, right? And the reason why India will automate faster than most of the world is that India has this very large skill gap. So if you want to build the quality of tools and machines, I'm not going to talk about software, right? If you want to build, tools and machines and other products, physical products, the same quality as the best in the world, for example, Japan or Germany, we don't have the skill power to do that. And I'll also explain why in a second. We don't have the ability to do that, so the only way you can do that effectively and fast enough is that you automate. And just to give you an example, and if you go and talk to auto parts manufacturers in Chennai, each of them will tell you, whoever started around 2004, the number of employees they have approximately has not changed in the last 10, 12 years. But they have grown by tenfold. There is one guy I know who I met at a conference. We became friends, and he told me that he had 70 employees in 2004. He has 70 employees now. 35 of them workers have gone away and been replaced by engineers, and the other 35 have remained. And because he is a humane person, he has not fired anybody. He's told them, if you leave and you find another job, I'll give you 60% of what I'm paying you for the rest of your life, but you don't have to work anymore. So he really has 35 employees, but he has grown tenfold. And the reason why he has grown tenfold is he's used automation to get to quality. Can we flip through the next few slides? Yeah. So the purpose, the reason and the conundrum that faces India is not the growth that we are facing, but how do we deal with, how do we take care of, and how do we empower the other 1.2 billion people who are outside the economy. Right, I give a billion because it's a catchy phrase, but it's really 1.2 billion. 90% of India's disposable income is in our hands. And when I say our hands, the top 80 million people of this country have 90% of India's disposable income. The other 10% is in the hands of what we call middle class, which are people who are literally, on the edge of poverty, which are the drivers and maids and skilled workers. And that is about 150 million people. 1.2 billion people have no disposable income, and the government of India is the only buyer. One reason why innovation doesn't take off is the government of India is the only buyer for 1.2 billion people. Next. And you know the reason why Silicon is starting to think. And can you just flip through the next 3 or 4 slides? So you have seen these graphs where we are going to hit inflection point of human level of computing power, not intelligence, in the next 15 years. Next. Next. You're seeing automation in manufacturing, households, facilities, including one gadget created by an Indian woman called a roti maker. Next. Security and logistics, and that floor there is the Amazon floor in India and Flipkart floor in India. It's not in the US. When you hit buy, machines go to work and they fulfill the order, which is why stuff gets to you within 2 days. Next. And I'm done with the physical stuff. People think that automation is only coming for physical goods and predictive services. Most of the sports reports you read right after the end of the cricket day. So if you are a cricket fan and 10:30 at night, India finishes or England finishes batting, you are reading newspaper reports at 11 o'clock. They don't look very nice, but they are informative. They're generated by a machine. Next. And computer-generated art. Most of elevators these days have computer-generated music because you don't have to copyright it. Next. Some statistics to show you that this is not vaporware. The World Bank, along with the Brookings Institute, did a deeper study for every developing country, and India was one of them. 69% of our jobs, this is a year ago, 69% of our jobs are going to disappear in the next 10 years. And McKinsey figured out that 250 million, right? 250 million IT and services jobs will disappear, most of them, a lot of them in India. But through all this crisis, a billion still remain at the gate. Next. So why does this matter? The reason why this matters is India has no choice. If you really want to take care of that 1.2 billion people, if you're not just worried about your and my jobs or the jobs of our children, India has no choice but to automate, and the reason is staring at you in front of you. So I did a study of all the major developing countries and tried to figure out what they spend on the major services that the state is supposed to provide or make sure citizens have, whether it's done private or public is irrelevant. So health and education and so on and so on. I'll give you an example of health. Of all the countries in the West, England has the most efficient healthcare system, and that costs approximately $3,000 per capita. Now, if you talk to people from England, they will say it's horrible, but it works, right? It's horrible because they won't let you in to see a doctor unless you're literally dying or something. But it works because they take care of people. Now, to apply that healthcare system to India will cost us $4.3 trillion. We don't have $4.3 trillion. We won't have for the next 20 years. Even if we had, the amount of money it would take to train the doctors and build the infrastructure would cost, even if we had $4.3 trillion, it would take us 20 years to train all the doctors we need, because you need one doctor for every 100 people. We have one doctor for every 2,000, and half our doctors should not be doctors. Right? So we have no choice but to automate. If you talk to people like Devi Shetty, he will say that India is at the cusp of automating healthcare, and he's right. Because the only way we will take care of 1 billion people is to create systems which will allow people to get healthcare instead of $3,000 at less than $300 per capita, at which we can afford. Right? And same is true for all the major things. So instead of $10.6 trillion, if we bring the cost down to $1 trillion, which we can afford in, let's say, 5-6 years when our economy becomes a $4 or $5 trillion economy. When we hit that point, we can actually afford to provide world-class healthcare, education, safety, and systems, and HR systems, and so on, which we don't have today. Next. So these are examples of healthcare at the brink of revolution. Anesthesiologists and so on are starting to not be required to do anesthesia, but to train the anesthesia machines. Next. And education is going through the same revolution. You just heard a little bit about that. What we are now doing is literally, not even the steam engine of automating education. When education becomes automated, it will look very, very, very different. Right? You will have these rock star teachers who will be touching 1 million kids every year, not thousands. And that future is not that far away. We are within 7 years of that. Next. Farming, one of the reasons why farmers suffer is your average 1.2 hectares is kind of useless because none of the automation systems of industrial era work for you. And the only way to do that is to create micro-intensive farming tools which are starting to get created. There is this one robot that one entrepreneur created and open sourced, which takes a field of approximately the size of this room and does intensive vegetable farming and automatically does weeding and does mixed vegetable farming so that aphids and other things are taken care of and so on. And the whole thing costs $20,000. Next. So I call this entire phenomenon the infinity era because everything is infinite. So I heard a lot of business students and business graduates are here. If you want to do marketing, right, you'll be very hard pressed to beat Facebook and Google's AdWords and ad machines. So if you just give them $10 and tell them about the product you're building, they will do a better job of marketing your product than you finding 1 or 2 people to do it. It's not until you actually reach several $1 million marketing budget scale you actually need a marketing person, right? And the same is true for distribution. If you want to distribute stuff, use one of the new e-commerce or new e-logistics companies, and you'll do a better job than any of the existing people. So the amount of effort required for distributing a product and making sure a new innovation reaches everybody on the planet will be so little that it becomes zero friction. And when zero friction, you can reach everybody in the planet within 5 years. Next. And as a result, economy stops being about labor. Capital remains, and resources, natural resources remain, but economy starts becoming resources and capital and ideas and new products. And the other thing I will say along with all of us is we have no idea what's coming, right? So on your right is the Tesla, which was not even a car company like 7 years ago and is now the world's most valuable car company, right? In spite of its leadership. And on the right is Android, which within 7 years became the world's largest operating system beating another technology operating system which took 30 years to get to that leadership. So what I'm saying is new technology movements will begin and be done within 5 years before you train yourself on them. So there's no point training yourself to be on the edge. It's a futile exercise. Next. So my own journey was that when I came to India, world map. So I started writing this piece of code called MapMaker, and the idea was that if you give the tool of mapping to all 7 billion people, people will map the world themselves. Next. And this is the world that they mapped about 6 years later, and 4 billion people more got maps, including all the maps you see in Bangalore and India that they didn't have before. So 190 countries got maps that didn't have maps. Next. And people started doing amazing things with it. This is what the infinity era looks like. You build a product, and the person who built the product has no idea what the product will be used for, right? So George Clooney used it for helping South Sudan succeed in a peaceful manner by using MapMaker to map atrocities wherever they happened. Next. And the UN reached out to us when Pakistan got flooded, and we gave them the maps, and they sent us back a letter saying of the 4.2 million people they rescued, 800,000 people would not have gotten aid, and 250,000 lives would not have been saved, but for the maps that MapMaker had. And the interesting thing is, the hero of that story was not the engineers who built it, but the heroes were the Pakistan users who actually mapped their own country, right? So as a infinity maker, I'm a enabler. I actually don't solve the problems, people solve the problems. Next. And these are some of those heroes who actually mapped their countries. Right in the middle, lit up, is this one of my personal heroes. His name is CNR Nayar. He was an ex-IS officer, and when MapMaker launched, he spent 4 years mapping rural Kerala. And Kerala became the first state to be rurally mapped in the entire developing world. And after that 4 years, he activated and inspired several young guys to follow him and do it. And after that 4 years, he passed away. He was suffering with cancer through those 4 years. Right. Next. And you have seen stuff like this. We are now at the cusp of building several platforms, what we call the India stack, Aadhaar and UPI and so on, which will transform India. And India will go from data poor to data rich. India will probably become the most data rich country in the world in the next 5 years. Next. And I will quote a few authors as I go through. This will take me 2 more minutes, I'm sorry. 10,000 hours is what it takes for you. So the question is, what do you do? And here's my 2 cents. Here's my humble advice. You don't have to take it. So each of you who want to have an impact or become a professional, pick an area that you love and spend 10,000 hours on it. Malcolm Gladwell has said it. But my own experience tells me that. And don't spend 10,000 hours 2 hours a day. It will take very long and you won't be an expert. Spend 10,000 hours 10 hours a day. In 3 years, you will become an expert in something. And you have to love it, otherwise you can't spend 10 hours a day on it. Next. And the other axis is, creativity. Creativity does not come with effort, it comes with access to nothing, right? Which is what our, the ancient authors say. So you have to read the ancient authors to understand that. Next. And the why, right? Why do we need to work? Why do people still need to engage in anything? Is this future that we have to shift, right? So there are 1.5 billion people who are very happy and were wondering whether their kids will go to Stanford or IIT Bombay or Iowa State. That is their conundrum. And there are 240 million people who go to sleep hungry every day. So when I realized this, I started understanding my users by eating only once a day. This was in 2010. And I learned a lot. And occasionally when I travel, I don't travel very well, so I don't eat at all. So I don't eat for those 48 hours. So recently I landed in the US and I have not eaten for 48 hours. And it's very interesting, right? There's a bunch of people who had eaten food and left half the food and went away. I was so hungry that I contemplated eating some of that. Now imagine people who have to do this every day. And they don't get the kind of meal I get every day, which I do, right? They don't get that nutritious meal. And we talk about development when we have not solved that problem. And the example there was a bunch of kids in Bihar started dying because of toxicity. Because of toxicity in their stomach, and it took doctors 3 years to figure out. And what they were doing was they were leftover lychees because they were having lychee surplus, and all they were eating were lychees. And nobody had ever figured out that if you eat lychees on an empty stomach, it releases toxins and you die. Right? And the kids and the parents, they knew it, but they couldn't stop the kids from eating lychees. This is the world we live in. Compete, contract, and crush. Right? You crush your competition. This is in our lingo. You compete the heck out of it, and you create contracts, and you have transactions. Right? This is the this is the business theoretic of the West we have learned, and this is the industrial age. I think this is what India is going to teach the world. Food, friends, and fun. Right? And let me explain what that means. Next. Gandhi taught us about friends. Right? How do you embark on journeys which are world-changing, at the same time not make enemies. Next. And Martin Luther King talked about how to do things together, and he also talked about this interesting phenomenon, interesting quote that stood me through my difficult journeys, which is, God does not give you a vision without giving you the strength to fulfill it. Right? And he's really right, but it takes a lot of effort to realize what he said. And the last one is Vivekananda, who talked about food. There was this one reporter who was visiting him, and instead of talking about religion, he was talking about hunger in Punjab. And somebody asked him, why are you talking about hunger? I'm talking about religion. And he said that until every dog in my country is fed, right, hunger is my religion. So food matters a lot. Next. And the way this is going to happen is not by the government doing it. The way this is going to happen is with 160 million entrepreneurs in India. India is the most entrepreneurial country on the planet. And India is the most friendly country on the planet. If you use our friendship and our entrepreneurship, I believe that the 160 million entrepreneurs who will come online using technology. Next. Next. When these 160 million entrepreneurs touch 7 billion people, I believe that we will transform the world. So with that, thanks.
5 minutes for questions.
Amazing, Lalitesh. My worry, as I heard you speak, maybe you and Vasanthi can address this. What happens to the human spirit? If you say there is going to be no work for people, what's actually going to happen to people? Because we, strive and have ambitions, and that's why we are what we are.
So I have my theory about it, and this is purely a personal theory. I'm not informed by statistics or research on this topic. So I believe that automation will actually, eliminate 95% of every job. So no particular discipline will disappear. You will still need janitors, but only 5%. You will still need carpenters. You will still need gardeners. You will still need nurses and doctors and so on. But you'll need only 5%, right? But these 5% will be making the future. So these are the makers who will advance technology and advance products and advance ideas, right? And there will be 95%. And that is where, and in the infinity era, we have to, kind of go back to authors who contemplated infinity. And they have actually, in many ways, they have already written down the answers. And if I interpret what, the Vedas and Vivekananda said, right? So you have the karma yogis, who are people, who are this 5% who will work for pleasure. And because they work for pleasure, they will actually reach the pinnacle of each of their disciplines. And then you have the bhakti yogis, who are the people who bring people together for love, the community makers, right? And then you have the jnana yogis, who are the scholars, and the raja yogis, who are the philosophers, and the people who will actually try to understand the human condition, right? And what that will look like is you have these 5%, you call them unicorns or whatever, and then you have a whole bunch of, we will organize into small businesses. We may not call them businesses, but 160 million, 300 million community makers who will, create local environments and create local businesses and local non-profits and local communities. And they will, make society work. And I think it will be an inspiring future. I'm an optimist. The other alternative, my colleagues in the West, like Hans Moravec, who's been thinking about this for 30 years, he says that, he believes the opposite of what I believe. He believes we will end up with a combination of Blade Runner and Total Recall. This horrible post-industrial automated future where humanity has lost its way, right? I don't believe that because I grew up in India and I know the human spirit having grown up in India. I think it's much stronger than people give it credit for.
Yeah. Okay. Lalitesh, that was fantastic. Could you talk a little bit about money? So, what is wealth distribution look like in the future? Because right now, work is a way to distribute wealth to people. So when no one is working, how do you pay for this? Or is the concept of paying for things going to disappear entirely?
Not that I know of, but if you believe Star Trek, it will, but I don't think that will. At least in the next 50 to 60 years. This is a very interesting question. I think it'll not be pretty. It'll not be pretty for you and me. And what I mean by that is for the 80 million people who enjoy upper middle class, you will see a dramatic redistribution of wealth to the top 10, 15 million people. And it'll not be pretty because of that, and it'll cause upheaval. And this will happen, this upheaval will be more in the West. So one of my mentors and teachers is now the Chancellor of UC San Diego, Pradeep Khosla. And he's deeply worried about the US because US has a vast middle class, what we would call the upper middle class. And that is about to be disrupted. Right? They don't know what to do with that. Fortunately, unfortunately, in India, we already are in that condition. The only thing is instead of 1.2 billion people, not having anything, you might have 1.25 billion people subject to growth, not having anything, and more wealth being concentrated in the hands of 10, 15 million. Now, it's not the 10, 15 million people that bothers me, it's actually the corporations that bothers me more. Because people talk about unicorns. We won't have unicorns. We will either have singularities or we'll have nothing, or we'll have small businesses. And these singularities, for example, Google and Facebook and Yahoo, not Yahoo, Netflix and Apple and Tencent and Alibaba are the singularities of the planet. And a singularity is defined by a growth rate of 20-30% year over year, even when your revenues are $100 billion or more. Right? There is no, and the more they grow, the faster they grow, which is what makes them a singularity. When that happens, these global conglomerates behave like nation states. Now we are at the mercy of the goodness of these nation states. We believe that Apple wants the right thing for its users. So and so is Google and so is Facebook, and some people believe and some people don't believe. It doesn't matter, right? We are at the mercy of these singularities. Now governments are trying to figure out what to do with them. But what should happen is, I think the money they make should flow into creating a safety net for everybody, a high quality safety net. Imagine a graduate student stipend for everybody. And then people who choose to do a lot more can rise through the ranks, and there is no limit to what an individual can do.
Thank you very much, Lalitesh. Thank you very much. Thank you.